Now that the red chassis is totally stripped down, it's time to start fixing a couple rust spots on it. So we've got two big spots to worry about here. The first one is right in front of the driver's side rear wheel. You can see that around the rocker and kind of where the inner wheel well meets the rocker, it's not great. It's not even 1/10 as bad as the teal car was, but you got to remember, I wasn't able to salvage it at all on the teal car. So this, I think, is salvageable. I don't think I'll have too much issue with it. One nice thing is that all or most of the metal is there, especially on this kind of curved part. So I do have a reference point for what it is actually supposed to look like, which I didn't have on the teal car. The second part is back here under the trunk at the very back of the car. You can see there's a big rust hole there, which would be easy to fix if the whole back side of this piece wasn't rotted out as well. So I need to replace the back side, this little rear piece. Luckily, the actual body panel itself is in very good shape because this is the part people see. You know, if I put a patch here or I put a patch back there, people don't have to look at it. And the one that I care about is in good shape, which is nice. That was a big thing I took into account when choosing this chassis for this swap was, yeah, it's not perfect. It does have a couple rust spots, but the rust spots it has are in places that really aren't that visible. They're not very high profile. And let's say if my repairs aren't 100% perfect, which honestly is a likelihood, we're not completely screwed. My original plan, which I think I might have mentioned in a previous video, was to get some heavy-duty lumber, create a rotisserie for this car, and then roll it onto its side so I could address all these rust issues. I ultimately decided that that probably wasn't worth the effort or the money because lumber is insane right now. So I'm just going to jack it up a bit higher and then do all this work while laying underneath it, which is annoying, but you know, I've been there before. It's not the worst thing in the world. The first spot I'm going to address is this one right here on the driver's side rocker panel because it's the one I find most distressing. It's definitely the most high profile one. It's one you can see just immediately while you're looking at the car. You can see on the red part here, I've already marked out what I need to cut. I'm going to follow this line and not that line. This was the first line I drew, and then I realized, hey, I can probably get away with cutting out less, so I switched to this line, which is a bit more of an uneven shape, but it also requires, you know, a less prominent cut, so I think that'll work out fine. So without further ado, I'm going to take an angle grinder and start cutting into my new good chassis, which is going to be a stressful experience. Alright, that's all the junk cleaned out from that particular rust hole. You might notice it still looks a little rusty in there, but everything that I've left is solid. The stuff that I cut out was unsalvageable. Any rust spots you can still see are definitely salvageable. They just require a wire wheel and some POR 15 basically. So the way I cut it out basically leaves us with three pieces that need to be recreated. There's this back piece here that is the inside of the rocker panel. It lays like that. There's the outside piece here that is the outside of the rocker panel that goes around like that. That is the body panel. And then there's one piece here that is the inner fender, and it just goes down like that. So basically we're just making three sides of a strange looking box. Luckily, the piece that I cut out of here, I still have. It's still in one piece, so it shouldn't be too hard to recreate, because I have something to use as reference. And the other two pieces don't have any contours. They're just straight pieces that need to be cut to a shape, just some flat sheet metal, and those won't be that difficult either. So the one I need to start out with here is this back piece, because that is the one that is the hardest to get to. If I were to do the other two first, then it would be impossible for me to weld this one in here. So I'm going to go find some cardboard, I'm going to lay out a template and determine the shape that that piece needs to be, and then once I've done that, I'm going to cut it out of sheet metal and weld it in. Using only the finest cardboard from a Welch's Fruit Snacks box, I mocked up that back piece there. You can see how simple it is. It's literally just a rectangle with a couple little details to it. Alright, so this is the piece I made to patch the outside of the rocker panel. I know it looks a little bit like nonsense right now, but trust me, there is some method to this madness. So basically it needs to go in here like this. Obviously it's not nearly shaped enough to actually go where it needs to go, and I think I'm going to do that as I weld it in. So I think I'm going to weld it in up here, and then as I weld it along the bottom of the rocker panel, I'm going to keep curving it in until it fits that gap. And then I also need to curve. This part needs to curve back to conform to this, this inner lip. Don't expect a lot of in-progress shots of this because I have a feeling I'm going to have my hands full and I'm probably not going to be in the mood to operate a camera. Alright, that's this patch panel shaped and tack welded in. I'm actually very happy with how it turned out. There are a couple minor problems. For instance, I left myself a lot of room to fill here, but I can put a piece of metal in behind there so I'm not constantly blowing holes in it while trying to fill this 4 or 5 millimeter gap. I also left this piece a little too long here where it wraps around. Actually, one sec. I also left this a little bit too long here where it wraps around, but that's really not an issue. I can just cut it off. I wasn't sure how much material it was going to take to kind of get the curve here, because it's not just a 90-degree angle, it curves in. So I left myself a bit extra, and it turns out I left myself quite a bit extra, but that is the opposite of a problem. Other than that, it's really not the worst work I've ever done. Honestly, it might be the best, which probably isn't great, because it's not amazing, but I think once I get that welded in, welds ground down, small amount of body filler to even it out, I think it's going to look pretty damn good. I've always worked under the impression that some not perfect body work is always better than rust, because rust multiplies and not perfect body work doesn't. But honestly, I don't even want to start selling myself short by calling this not perfect, because maybe I can make it perfect. We'll have to see what happens here. Alright, that's this patch piece welded in, and I'm actually really happy with how that turned out. I think just a little bit of body filler on that's all it's going to take to make it look as close to perfect as I, as a craftsman, am physically capable of making it work. I'm sure a professional body man could do better, but I didn't really want to pay a professional body man to do better. I think this is good enough to fool 95% of people, and anyone it doesn't fool can fuck off as far as I'm concerned. And like, if you look at it from about this angle, which is all you'd really see if you were standing next to the car, it looks really good. I still have to clean up that lip there that's still too wide, but I mean, I'm really happy with how this is turning out. I'm going to do a little bit more touch-up work on this, and then I'm going to move on to the next spot that needs to be repaired. And I'm going to hold off on putting this back plate in here, just because I'd like to spray some weld-through primer or something in there, and I don't have any right now. So for the time being, I'm going to move on to the next one, which is right under there. That one's going to be really easy. There's no real shape to it or anything. Basically, it's just going to require me to cut out a rectangle and then curve it and then weld it in. And I'm going to make this one quick because who cares about it? So in a stroke of luck, this one on the rocker panel here actually turned out to not need a patch panel at all. I thought it would be so rusty under that bubbled paint that once I took a wire wheel to it, I would just open up a giant hole in the rocker panel. But it turns out that didn't happen. The wire wheel was able to strip weld this surface rust, leaving behind actually very sturdy metal. That surface rust wasn't very deep at all. So all this really needs is obviously a little bit more wire wheel and then some kind of rust converter and some filler to smooth it out, and it's good. So I'm not even going to worry about this one for now. I'll worry about that later when I'm doing paint prep. So with this one on the rocker panel here deemed a non-issue, that's actually the last of the rust spots that are visible from the outside of the car, which is awesome. Everything else that I have to fix is either on the underside or it's somewhere where a normal person would never have to see it, which is good because that means I have to worry a lot less about body work and finish welding and all that stuff that I hate to worry about. For example, the next one I have to work with is right here, and that's just a small little hole. It looks like it rusted out from the inside actually, and got so thin that it just caved in, and it's a hole now. And this one is under where the fender would be, so nobody's ever gonna see this repair, which means I don't have to be quite as meticulous about it. Obviously, I still wanna do a good job, but you know, there's a lot less pressure. So the plan of attack for this one here is basically I'm gonna hit this with a hammer to expand this hole out to where the metal's not that thin anymore, and then I'm gonna cut it out and replace it. Technically, I bought this ball peen hammer for body work, and technically what I'm doing is body work. Woo! Yep, and that's why the hammer. Because if I had tried to weld to that stuff, it would have just blown a hole that size, basically. There's a valuable lesson in there about never taking rust at face value. Always assume, if you see a tiny patch of rust, assume it's a huge patch of rust. It's like cockroaches. Alright, that's the rusty part cut out. Now unfortunately there's not really enough of this left to use as a template for a patch panel, but it's not a big deal. So that's the hole I now have to patch. You can see it's nothing crazy, it's basically just a rectangle with a bit of a curve to it. What I'm going to do right now is make something out of cardboard that will fit in that space that I can then transfer to sheet metal to make myself a patch panel. Alright, that's all it is. About the size of a credit card. And now we just cut that out on metal, put a bend in it, and weld it in. That's this front corner patched up. This goes entirely underneath the fender. Nobody's ever going to see it, so I'm really not going to worry about cleaning up these welds very much. In 30 years, when some professional restoration shop comes through, they can worry about that, because I do not care. Looking at the passenger side front corner, it does not have the same problem as the driver's side did. This is not rusted out. There's a little bit of surface rust here that'll need to get wire wheeled down, but I'll worry about that during paint prep. The passenger side does have the same problem that the driver's side had right here in this little seam on the rocker panel where every 240 ever gets rust. This one looks like it was exacerbated by somebody drilled a hole right there that water could get into, probably for a side skirt. So I'm going to wire wheel this one down. If we're lucky, it will be like the other side and it won't actually require a patch panel, but it looks like that's a hole. I think I'm gonna end up having to patch this a little bit, but we'll dig into it and see what happens. Alright, so I got all that wire wheeled off, and you can see there is a small hole. I don't even think that's gonna require a patch panel though. I think I can probably just weld that shut. I think it's thick enough around the edges that it's not going to require me to like knock out a bunch of that and create a larger patch panel. So that's not the world's biggest deal, and then the rest of that I can just treat the same way I'm going to treat the other side. A bit of converter, a bit of 415, a bit of Bondo to even it out, and should be good to go there. So while I was looking at this side, I did notice that this back corner is worse than I thought it was. I thought this would just be hit it with a wire wheel and it would be good to go, but there is actually some rust holes in between this bottom part of the rocker panel and the pinch weld right there. This is like layered steel. There's like a bunch, there's like 3 or 4 layers here, and the outside layer is the only one with holes in it. So what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to cut off this outside layer and then make a patch panel, and that one shouldn't be too difficult because I should be able to lap weld it. And again, it's basically under the car. It's really not going to require that much cleanup, but that is a bit of a pain in the ass because I thought this was a clean section. I didn't think this was going to require a patch. Honestly, the fact that I consider this chassis to be like my clean chassis is a little fucked up, because this chassis is really not that clean relative to a new car. This chassis is quite bad, but like relative to the 240s that are in my area, this chassis is about as good as it gets, at least for less than, you know, $10,000. But nothing we've seen so far has been even half as bad as the teal chassis, so onward and upward, I guess. Alright, this is the patch panel. It just goes under here like that. I just have to lap weld it on and then clean up the welds a bit, because although this is the underside of the car, it is still technically a painted area. And then, yeah, not nearly as bad as the repair I had to do on the other side. Alright, so we've got that rust hole welded up. We've got this patch panel installed. Please don't bully me about how bad that looks. And now we can move on to the final boss. So in the Teal 240, this whole part here at the bottom of the trunk was completely rusted out. It was gone to the point where stuff was falling out of the trunk through the hole. Now on this car, it's better, but it's not actually good. So luckily, this outside body piece is in very good shape. There's like no rust on it, it's not bubbling. But on the inside, it is really, really bad. That's not supposed to be a hole, and that's not supposed to be a hole. And then if I go around the back, this is also not supposed to be a hole. So that is a lot of patchwork I have to do, and the only solace I can take is that it is all on the back side, so it does not have to be beautiful, it just has to be structurally sound. I'm very glad I do not have to try and recreate this piece, because I don't want to. Remember, on the Teal 240, I didn't even try to recreate any of this. I just cut it higher and boxed it. But I don't have the luxury of doing that on the red car, because I'm not putting a body kit on this one. I think this calls for a classic shoot first, ask questions later approach, where I just go in here with an angle grinder, I cut out all the rust, and then I figure out how I'm gonna replace that metal later. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, I'm pretty fucking tired of this. But that's all the rust cut out from this bottom piece here. Now I gotta replace it with sheet metal, which really, really bums me out. I'm gonna start with the small, kind of complex things here and work my way up to the large, simple pieces. So I'll start with this guy here. Alright, that's this rear trunk extension done. You can see I didn't put the vent back in there because I don't care. All those vents do is let water in and let your whole thing get rusted out, and I don't want that. So no vent. Overall, it's solid, but it's ugly. I am not a good welder, but I'm not worried about it, because it's underneath the car, and my whole kind of motto here is put the janky stuff under the car and then slam the car so hard that no one can ever see it. And that brings us back to the first area we worked on for the last rust-related patch panel I have to make, and that is just this big hole I cut in the inner fender while I was replacing this part. This one doesn't look very complicated. I don't think it'll take me very long at all. I know for a fact that is the interior of the car right there, and I'm going to set a bunch of seam sealer on fire while I do this, which is always fun. But yeah, and then once that's done, I'm done rust-related welding, which I am so excited for because I hate welding so much. But I'm not done welding. I'm done rust-related welding. We will have one more job after this, which I will get to right after I zap a patch panel in here. And there's a patch panel. I'm sure you can tell how completely done with this I am by the lack of progress video. And we are done chassis rust fixing. The nice thing about this is this chassis is all torn down. I've seen every square inch of it. I know that I'm not going to get broadsided with more rust like I did on the Teal 240. So yeah, we're not quite done chassis work in general. We still specifically have to do something about these missing wheel arches, but as for rust, that's basically it. There's still some minor stuff like you know, a little bit of rust here on this door seam that just needs to be ground off. I'm not even gonna worry about showing you guys that. You know, obviously my body work is not professional grade body work. It is decidedly amateur grade body work. But the big success here is ultimately that a bunch of rust is now gone. It's not gonna spread anymore. Yeah, you know, I added some booger weld to the chassis, and that's, you know, maybe not gonna win me any concourse shows, but the thing is, booger welds don't spread. Rust spreads. So I'll take booger welds over rust all day, and there's now nothing on this car that I'm genuinely worried about is going to spread and, for instance, rot out my trunk or rot out my wheel arches. So I think this is a good logical place to stop. For one, I'm very tired of metalworking right now, and I want to go do something else. So stay tuned for next time when we do the last of the chassis work, specifically these wheel arches. There's a couple other minor things that need to be welded in from the Teal car. But yeah, stay tuned.